Call them at 1-212-732-4455. The Alzheimer's Association. Support, information, and help for people with Alzheimer's or dementia and for their families. Call them at 1-800-272-3900. The American Association of Homes and Services for the Aging. Advice on how to choose a long-term care facility, plus information on the types of care available. Call them at 202-783-2242. If you have access to the web, log on to 13's website at 13.org and go to New York Voices Health Specials for links to these sources and more.
And with me once again are Sarah Sadin, Director of the Partnership for Elder Care, and Howard Krooks of Littman, Krooks and Roth, an experienced elder law attorney. Let me start with finances. If a family can't pay for private care, is a nursing home the only option?
No, it is not. And that's one of the reasons we like for people to start planning
Early.
before the crisis, because particularly in New York State, Medicaid is very generous, and there are ways to implement home care that will be beneficial for a family who wishes to stay in the home, to have a family member either on their own in their own home or living with them. And while I saw that other piece, one of the things that struck me was that if the daughter, as an employee of an organization, had that kind of information from Partnership for Elder Care or some other employee elder care service, she would have been a bit ahead of the game in knowing who to call so she could have direction in that area.
Is this one of the things you do, Howard, try to help people figure out how to get the resources they need to take care of an older relative?
Absolutely. One of the things that I've noticed in my own practice is from 10 years ago to today, is we're becoming more and more aware of the variety of services that are being offered in the community by various professionals, such as Sarah and geriatric care managers. And they're becoming a much larger part of our practice because there are things that geriatric care managers can do that I don't have the expertise to do, although because I'm on the other side of the table with my client, they're coming to me for the information. So it's my job to be familiar with the resources and point them in the right direction to make sure that they can access those resources at the appropriate time.
Now, what about long-term care insurance? First of all, what is it?
Well, there are several companies offering a policy in which you can begin paying in at a very young age. And there are a series of different kinds of benefits, home care benefits. Some of them cover assisted living facilities, nursing homes. The thing is, one has to be very cautious about reviewing those kinds of policies, making sure that they offer the kind of benefits you think you might need, an inflation rate included, because of course the costs will increase dramatically. And you have to be in good health in order to purchase one.
So is that for yourself, or can you get it for a parent?
Oh, you can get it for a parent if that parent is still in relatively good health. You will not be able to purchase a policy if they have severe medical problems or Alzheimer's disease, because no insurance company is going to sell you a policy when you're in need of the services right then. So you need to, that's another bit of planning.
Right. So how do I decide to get this if I want to?
Well, if you're looking to plan, then you want to meet with an insurance professional who's going to lay out for you a variety of different planning options. You can get daily benefit amounts that range anywhere from $150 to up to $350 a day, and you've got to decide where are you most comfortable in terms of having the coverage for each day of need. If you only get $150 a day of coverage, but a nursing home costs $350 a day, that means even though you have a long-term care policy in place, you're still dipping into your pocket to the tune of $200 a day. On the other hand, if you get the $350 a day policy, your premium may now very well be double, and you've got to look at whether you can afford to pay that higher premium. So one of the things we help our clients with is, once we put them in touch with a long-term care professional, is we'll take a look at the various policies that are being proposed and help them to sift through these various issues, because it's not just the daily benefit amount, it's the elimination period, how long do you have to wait before the benefits kick in, and there are a whole host of other issues that you have to decipher, and it's very difficult if you're a layperson dealing with this for the very first time.
Very much. Okay, thank you both. You know, 80% of older people with long-term needs continue to live in their homes and communities. But for many families, home caregiving isn't possible or desired as part of a happy, healthy future. Their finances allowed Eleanor and Marnie lots of good choices. But the time to make a decision came quickly, and when it did, the change was still tough on mother and daughter. Here's their story.
We were always very close. We went through the bad teenage years, I guess as all mothers and daughters do, and there's that mother-daughter thing, but we've always had a very close relationship. My mom and I talked about her getting older in a sort of general way. She did do a living will. She wanted to make sure that that was taken care of if she were to get sick, that no extraordinary means were taken. My parents were very, very close. So those kind of decisions were always something they talked about and not something that any of us kids were really part of.
He was like a wonderful person, and we just loved each other to pieces. And it's hard even now thinking about him.
But when my father died in 1996, we did talk about it some, but whenever it would come to, what if it got to the point where you couldn't live alone, she would just always say, I'm just going to take a long walk then. And I don't want to live with any of you kids. But she didn't really want to have the conversation about what's really going to happen. It actually happened very quickly. It's dementia, Alzheimer's. I think probably because she was trying to hide it and was doing a good job of it, that we were maybe not aware of maybe the situation. But then we found out that she had been out wandering in the middle of the night. Her short-term memory was just getting worse and worse. If you'd ask her a question, and when you'd be there with her, and then we'd eat, and then she'd say, well, do you think we need to make something for lunch? And maybe we'd just finished 10 minutes ago. So that's when we really realized that things had gotten to a dangerous level and something was going to have to happen. I talked to all of my siblings about it, and my husband as well, about having my mother live with us, and we did discuss it, and it was certainly something we would have done if that's what the only option, but we knew how much my mother didn't want that to happen. It would have really taken all of her independence away, and I didn't know what we were going to do, and I knew no matter what happened, it was going to be awful, at least in the beginning, for her and for me and for all of us. Again, I'm the one that talks to all of my siblings, so I would be on the phone with all of them. It was very intense for a while, and we would be short with each other sometimes on the phone, but it never got to a point where we all knew we were trying to do the best thing for my mother. We started looking at assisted living. I didn't know a lot about assisted living, but it seemed like that would be the best choice. I mean, I knew that an assisted living community was having people be as independent as they could be, but I didn't know exactly what the setup was. And I came to Blythe House, and all of the other ones that I had visited, they have special units or locked units for dementia and Alzheimer's patients. And at Blythe House, they don't do that. It's just not part of their philosophy. They don't think that people should be separated. So immediately I just felt more comfortable here. When we first said, Mom, you're going to be moving and you're going to be moving to Blythe House, and she'd say, you're taking me to the White House? And she didn't really exactly know what was happening. She was just that confused. But she'd say, I don't know if I want to go to this place. And at that point, I would just say, well, you really have to now. Remember how we said you can't be alone? Because when we would remind her that she'd wandered, she would get very upset with herself that she could have possibly done something like that. That's kind of how we would convince her that she really couldn't be living alone. She kept saying, I don't know why I did this. How could this have happened to me? But then she would realize that she didn't want that to happen again. So she said, well, okay, I'll come and try this, but I don't know if I'm going to stay there. When we were going to make the move down here, I was a wreck the entire time. Very, very fearful about what would happen when she got here. Was she going to say she didn't want to stay? What would the people be like? It was just, I was holding my breath almost the entire trip. One thing I really appreciated was that people here said that there would be an adjustment period. They said that it usually takes about 2 months. And of course I wanted her to come and say that it was the most wonderful place she'd ever been and fall in love with it and sleep well that night. But she hated it. She didn't like me. She was upset and kept saying that my father would never have done this to her, put her in an asylum, and she was not going to stay. The first 2 weeks, I would say, were really awful. But after that, she started to get used to it more. The people were wonderful.
So, I mean, I don't know quite whether I'm happy or if I'm not. People are very nice, though. And it's a good place to have.
After the initial adjustment period, she's much more relaxed than she was. And she's actually much more open. She was always funny, but she's much more open and not as afraid of her sense of humor as she used to be.
So you got anything else interesting? Or do you feel that you should just conk out?
Looking back on the whole situation, I would have started looking a lot sooner at assisted living facilities, not with my mother. I don't think there are very many people until it gets to the point where they absolutely can't live alone who are going to go. Obviously, when you're in this position, I've talked to a lot of people, several friends who've been going through the same situation, and some of them tried to get their parents to go and look at them and got nowhere, and then got discouraged themselves, stopped looking. So if I'd known then, I just would have started looking on my own. I feel resolved and very relieved that she's here in this wonderful place. I think there's still some unresolved feelings about the disease itself and what's going to happen down the road with it. One thing that my sisters and I were extremely grateful for is that she'll be able to stay here. She won't ever have to leave Blythe House. They have nurses. They're set up to take care of her for the rest of her life. And the fact that, you know, she knows everyone here now, that's a good feeling. But there's still the feelings of what is it going to be like a few years from now. That's still somewhat unresolved, but I'm sure that will just be part of the process.
It's wonderful. She's been just so good, and she and her husband too, and it's incredible what they've done for me. But I guess they wanted to.
Jean Murphy is Executive Director of Friends and Relatives of the Institutionalized Aged, a nonprofit group that helps nursing home residents, organizes their families and friends, educates consumers, and lobbies for better laws and public policies. Jean, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Okay, I gave a lot of information about what you do, but tell us more about FRIA, this organization.
Okay, well, we've been around for 25 years. We have been trying to improve all long-term health care for New Yorkers, and particularly for people in institutions, trying to make sure they have the highest quality of life possible. One of the things that we do is to try to give information to consumers, principally now to families, to make sure that they have the information they need to make the best choices they have among long-term health care options, and that they can get the best health care in a nursing home or in an assisted living facility or in home care.
And you have a wonderful handbook that gives a lot of that information, correct?
We have a book that's in public libraries. It's comprehensive and very New York specific about what the rules are here in New York.
Now, we just saw a story where the assisted living facility looked terrific, but even with that, the daughter, Marnie, seemed very restless and very unsure about it and about putting her mother there. Is that typical of a family member who puts an elder relative in a place like that?
The transition is very hard. It's very hard when the older relative is resistant and wants, naturally wants to stay home. I think we have a lot of very strong myth in our society, and particularly in particular families or cultures, that we don't do this, we keep people at home. Things have changed a lot. People live much longer. They live through much more intense illnesses. They need much more sophisticated health care. When you can keep someone at home, either in your own home or in their own home, that's usually best. But often you can't keep someone home safely. You don't have the resources to do that. You can't keep them well cared for and safe at home. And in that point, you really do have to look at other options.
What are the issues that families have to discuss and think about if they're considering putting one of their elder relatives in a nursing home or in an assisted living facility? And by the way, what's the difference between a nursing home and an assisted living facility in a nutshell?
Well, a nursing home really has more health care and more sophisticated health care. Assisted living, actually, in New York State, there's not a lot of regulation, and it can be a number of things. It's a much bigger range. It tends to be more residential in feeling and have less intense health care, although some of them really carry people through almost, you know, into what would normally be a nursing home setting. Medicaid will pay for nursing home care if you do not have the resources to pay for it yourself. In New York State, it's much